Hello, this is Randy, and welcome back to another edition of Brain Break with Randy and Keitho. I have had the opportunity in the last couple of years of running into quite a few people from Venezuela. They are recent immigrants to our country. When I was in Venezuela, Venezuela was the most progressive country in South America. Its economy was even better than Brazil's, believe it or not. Of course, they have more oil than Saudi Arabia, but the problem is they haven't necessarily taken care of their plants. When the Chavistas came into power, they nationalized a lot of industry, and then they put their friends in charge of it. Their friends didn't keep it up, according to the people I've talked to in business down there. They would then take money out of the businesses. So when I have been either being a substitute teacher at a school, I see somebody, they are struggling with English, and I'll say, "Hey, where are you from?" They'll tell me Mexico or wherever. Sometimes they're a little reticent to say. And I'm not going to go into any detail, but it's kind of sad that they're embarrassed about where they're from. But usually they'll tell me they're from Venezuela. A lot of times they don't want to tell me what part of Venezuela. I can talk to them enough about Venezuela that they realize that I like Venezuela. Where I live here in Mesa, there is an amazing Venezuelan restaurant called Querer. And in Venezuela, if you were to say que chévere, means that's the coolest thing. Chévere, that's very cool. They serve Venezuelan food. They have Venezuelan drinks. My family does not like Malta Polar, and I adore it. I think it's amazing. When I was in Venezuela, Malta Polar was our Gatorade. We would drink it just to kind of put the calories back on, because if you're in one of the hotter places, you're going to burn off more calories than you could keep on. It was a very beautiful country. It would rain for about 6 months a year in the rainy season. When it would rain like that, they told me to take a raincoat, which was way too hot. And then they told me to take an umbrella. You just didn't use an umbrella. You'd get wet and then you'd dry off. I mean, you could just get soaking wet from the rain because it would really come down. And then for 6 months or so, it didn't rain. And so things towards the end of that 6 months, things would dry out and the hills would go from green to brown. I didn't notice a lot of forest fires, but it's been interesting talking to these people. I went recently for a service project that our church had at a men's shelter. A couple of the men were wearing shirts that said something about Venezuela on them. I just asked them in Spanish, I said, "Hey, are you from there?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, that's great. I used to live there. I love Venezuela." So they were very excited to talk to somebody that had been to their home. I found it very interesting to talk to them. But the food that they have in Venezuela, they make this thing called una arepa. An arepa is made out of masa, but what they do is they actually cook the masa like we would for making tortillas or tamales or whatever. But then they dry it and then they grind it up again after they've cooked it. So it's called harina, pre-cooked flour. And then what they'll do is take that and make it into little patties, and they'll cook it on a grill or deep fat fry them. They don't cook all the way through because they're pretty thick. And so when they serve them, if they know what they're doing, they scoop out the inside, which is not cooked. And then they stuff it with anything from beans, ham, and cheese. They're very delicious. They make another thing that I really enjoy called a cachapa. And a cachapa is like a pancake, but it's made with corn. In the very good restaurants, they don't use any powdered flour or anything like that. They just literally can make it from corn on the cob. It's delicious. And what they do is, you don't eat it with syrup, but they might put a little butter on it, and then they'll melt some cheese, and they call it their cheese queso de mano, which means hand cheese or cheese of the hand. It doesn't melt like our cheese. Our cheese always melts, but it's still really good cheese. It's kind of a salty kind of cheese. They have stuff that's close to it from Mexico, but it's not the same thing. So those are the two things I like. And then the Malta Polar. Malta is where they take, before they've added the yeast to the beer, they take the skimmings off the beer, the malt, and then they pasteurize that and add water back to it. It becomes kind of a refreshing drink. It's an acquired taste, but I got to tell you, I still love it. And I don't find it very often, but when I do, I'll get a six pack and enjoy it for the next little while. Not very often because it's got a lot of calories to it, but it's interesting. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about is this gang called Tren de Agua, Aragua. It's a prison gang that came here. Our government is not paying attention, I guess. Why they would, but the same thing they did with MS-13 from El Salvador. They let those guys in and they kind of take over. In fact, they do take over. And they make our gangs, whether it be the Italian mafia, the Russian mafia, the Crips and the Bloods, the gangster disciples, they make those guys look like wimps. They're just not near as violent as these guys. These guys are extremely violent. It's not a good thing. Venezuela, when I was there, was just an amazing country. And we didn't have the problems with the gangs that they have now. But they've gone through, I don't know how many years of bad economy where most everybody's unemployed. As I've said before, the people I knew in Venezuela have all left. But it isn't unusual to talk to somebody who has had to resort to being in a gang or to, for a mother, for instance, to turn to prostitution because that was the only way she could figure out to keep food on the table and to feed her family. I don't think that's a good thing. I think it's terrible. But I also think it's terrible for a government to allow their country to dissolve into anarchy due to greed. So thank you so much for joining me. I just wanted to tell you that I get to run into people from Venezuela. I sure enjoy them. When I lived in Venezuela, they used to say Venezuela, un país para querer, which means a country to love. It really was a beautiful country. The people were amazing. They were very beautiful people. They were very generous people. It was interesting because they hated the CIA, but they loved Americans. I hope they can work their problems out. It's clear to me that the current government is illegal and that they are manipulating the elections. And I think almost everybody in the world has, except with, like Cuba and China and Russia, have accepted the man that was elected instead. The last two elections, and this Maduro is still in power. I have friends from Venezuela that have told me that he is not even a Venezuelan. He's from Colombia. I can't prove it one way or another, but they're sad what's happening to their country. Thank you for joining me again for Brain Break with Randy and Keitho. Please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about us, and if you can, leave a comment. Please have a great day.